Welcome to this exploration of one of philosophy's oldest and most haunting questions. Who am I, really? Across cultures, religions, and philosophies, identity has been debated endlessly, and yet it remains deeply personal. Are we defined by our physical body, the vessel we inhabit? Are we the sum of our memories, shaped by past experiences? Or are we our personality, that bundle of traits, tendencies, and quirks that others recognize? Some traditions go deeper still, suggesting that identity is not found in body, memory, or personality, but in a spiritual essence beyond change and decay. The question is not just academic, it is existential. To ask, "Who am I?" is to ask about meaning, purpose, and belonging. Philosophers like John Locke tied identity to memory, while David Hume doubted that a fixed self even exists. Søren Kierkegaard believed identity is grounded in relationship with the divine, while Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are free to create ourselves. Religions likewise give differing answers. Buddhism denies a permanent self altogether, Christianity affirms a soul that endures, and Hinduism teaches an eternal Atman. Literature adds its own voices, from Shakespeare's shifting characters to Virginia Woolf's explorations of selfhood. The question, "Who am I?" is not answered once and for all. It must be lived, revisited, and wrestled with. This video invites you to join a journey of reflection, philosophy, and spirituality as we confront the dilemma of identity. The self has always been a puzzle. We talk about finding ourselves, yet when we look too closely, the self seems to shift and disappear. In ancient philosophy, Plato believed the soul was the truest essence of identity, eternal and unchanging. His student Aristotle saw identity more in terms of form and function, the body and its purpose. Fast forward to modern thought, John Locke argued that personal identity is grounded in memory. If you can remember past actions, then you are the same person. But David Hume questioned this, claiming that when he looked inward, he found not a unified self, but only a bundle of perceptions. This view unsettles us, because if there is no fixed self, then who are we? Buddhism aligns with Hume in some ways, teaching anatta, the doctrine of no self, that identity is an illusion created by clinging to impermanent things. Yet Hinduism argues the opposite, that beneath change lies the eternal Atman, the true self identical with Brahman. Christianity maintains that a soul defines us, loved and known by God. Literature reflects this confusion too. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, the prince struggles with who he is in the face of duty, grief, and doubt. Identity is elusive because it is layered: body, memory, relationships, culture, and perhaps spirit. The self is a puzzle we may never fully solve, but in the act of questioning, we discover more about what it means to be human. One way to define identity is through the body. Our body grounds us in time and space. It is how others recognize us. Physical continuity seems to guarantee identity. You are the same person as yesterday because you inhabit the same body. But is that enough? The philosopher Thomas Reid criticized Locke by pointing out that memory fades, but the body still ties us to our past selves. Yet biology reminds us that our bodies change constantly. Cells die and regenerate, scars form, faces age. Are we still the same person when nearly every cell has been replaced? The Ship of Theseus, a famous thought experiment, asks whether an object remains the same if all its parts are replaced. Applied to the body, it raises the same question: am I still me if my body has been renewed? Disability and illness complicate this further. Does losing a limb or experiencing drastic physical change alter who we are? Christianity teaches that we are embodied souls, while Hinduism views the body as a temporary vessel for the eternal self. Literature often highlights bodily identity. Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis shocks us with Gregor Samsa's transformation into an insect, raising questions about identity beyond the body. The body matters, but does it define us entirely? Many argue no. The body grounds identity, but it cannot explain the whole self. Something deeper must persist. For John Locke, memory was the key to personal identity. He argued that if you can remember doing something, then you are the same person who did it. Identity, then, stretches through time by memory. But what about forgotten experiences? Are we less ourselves when memories fade? Amnesia challenges Locke's view. If someone loses all memory, are they still the same person? Neuroscience complicates matters further, showing that memories can be distorted, reconstructed, or false. David Hume pointed out that if identity rests on memory, then identity is fragile indeed, because memory is not always reliable. Literature wrestles with this too. In Proust's In Search of Lost Time, memory becomes the key to recovering identity, yet it is fleeting and involuntary. In Memento, the film Memory Loss disrupts identity so profoundly that the protagonist cannot trust himself. Religions also weigh in. Christianity emphasizes God's memory of us even when we forget ourselves, while Buddhism cautions against clinging to memory, since all is impermanent. Hinduism suggests that memory stretches beyond one lifetime through reincarnation and karma. The puzzle deepens. If memory grounds identity, then who are we when memory falters? Perhaps memory is part of identity, but not the whole. We are more than recollections. We are also presence, spirit, and relation. Another common way we define identity is through personality. When we say, "That's just who I am," we often mean our preferences, temperaments, and behaviors. Personality psychology divides people into traits: introverted or extroverted, open or cautious, agreeable or assertive. These traits shape how we see ourselves and how others perceive us. Roles also influence personality. Being a parent, a leader, a friend, or a sibling all contribute to identity. Yet personality changes too. The person you were at 10 years old is not the same person you are today. Trauma, love, loss, and growth reshape personality. Even psychological disorders complicate our sense of identity. Does a change in mood or personality disorder make someone not themselves? Friedrich Nietzsche warned against defining ourselves too narrowly. He argued that we should embrace becoming, constantly reshaping identity through will and creativity. Meanwhile, Kierkegaard insisted that personality without grounding in faith risks despair because personality alone cannot bear the weight of existence. Literature echoes this tension. Virginia Woolf's Orlando spans centuries with a protagonist who changes gender and personality, yet retains a thread of continuity. Personality matters, but is it the whole self or just one mask among many? Perhaps it expresses identity without fully explaining it. For many, identity is rooted not in body, memory, or personality, but in a spiritual essence. Christianity speaks of an immortal soul, uniquely created and known by God, which persists beyond physical death. Hinduism teaches of Atman, the eternal self identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality. Buddhism challenges both views by teaching anatta, the doctrine of no self, which denies any permanent identity at all. These religious perspectives deeply influence how cultures understand the question of self. If we have a soul, then identity is stable and transcendent. If we have no self, then identity is fluid, an ever-shifting illusion. This is not only a religious question, but a philosophical one. Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," rooting identity in consciousness itself. But David Hume disagreed, arguing that consciousness is only a series of fleeting impressions, not evidence of a soul. Literature often depicts the soul as the true self. Consider Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, where the struggle between body, memory, and soul defines characters' identities. Modern psychology sometimes bridges these views, suggesting that whether or not a soul exists, humans experience a deep longing for meaning beyond material existence. The idea of a spiritual essence offers stability in a chaotic world. Whether illusion or reality, the concept of soul shapes how billions answer the question, Who am I, really? Philosophy has wrestled with identity for millennia, often leaving us with more questions than answers. Plato taught that identity lies in the eternal soul, while Aristotle rooted it in form and function. Descartes grounded identity in thinking consciousness, but Hume dismantled this, finding no self beyond perceptions. John Locke emphasized memory as the key to identity, while Thomas Reid critiqued him, pointing out paradoxes when memory fails. Immanuel Kant argued that identity arises from the rational, moral self, the I that must exist to ground experience. Søren Kierkegaard tied identity to a relationship with God, warning of despair when the self forgets its source. Friedrich Nietzsche turned identity into an act of creation, urging us to become who you are. Hannah Arendt argued that identity is revealed through action and narrative, the stories we tell about ourselves. Jean-Paul Sartre rejected any fixed essence, claiming that we are condemned to freedom, always defining ourselves by our choices. These philosophies do not converge. Instead, they paint identity as body, memory, soul, morality, creativity, or freedom. Rather than solve the puzzle, philosophy expands it, and in doing so, it reminds us that identity is not static. It is dynamic, lived, and questioned. Religious traditions provide powerful frameworks for understanding identity. Christianity teaches that our identity is rooted in being created in the image of God, redeemed by grace, and known by name. The soul, in this view, is enduring and beloved, carrying us into eternal life. Hinduism, meanwhile, emphasizes Atman, the true self, which transcends the cycles of birth and death, ultimately uniting with Brahman. This vision grounds identity in eternity, not in fleeting memory or body. Buddhism, by contrast, unsettles us with the doctrine of anatta. There is no permanent self. Identity is a temporary aggregation of body, feelings, perceptions, and consciousness, all of which are impermanent. Islam also speaks to identity, emphasizing submission to Allah and grounding the self in relationship to divine will. Judaism sees identity as communal as well as personal, rooted in covenant and tradition. Each tradition offers a different lens. Identity as eternal soul, identity as illusion, identity as covenant, identity as divine reflection. Literature, too, is shaped by these influences. Tolstoy's Confession wrestles with faith and selfhood, while Rumi's poetry dissolves identity into love for the divine. Across religions, the self is never merely an individual construct. It is deeply connected to something larger, God, the cosmos, or the illusion of both. Faith both defines and transforms identity, giving us stories that shape who we are. Psychology gives us modern tools for exploring identity, though it doesn't solve the mystery. Erik Erikson described identity development as a series of stages, where crises must be resolved at different points in life, adolescence, adulthood, and beyond. He suggested that identity is built through integrating past, present, and future into a coherent sense of self. Carl Jung added another layer with the idea of archetypes and the collective unconscious, suggesting identity is shaped by universal human patterns. In contrast, Freud emphasized unconscious desires and conflicts as foundational to personality and identity. Today, psychologists often study identity through roles, attachment, and self-concept. Memory research reveals how fragile our self-stories are. What we remember about ourselves is often reconstructed, not recorded. Neuroscience deepens this further, showing that the brain creates a narrative of self through networks of perception, emotion, and reflection. This challenges the idea that there is a single, unchanging self. Identity, then, becomes a psychological performance, coherent enough to function, but flexible enough to adapt. Yet psychology also shows how essential identity is. Without a sense of self, mental health deteriorates. Disorders like dissociation or identity diffusion reveal the suffering caused when selfhood collapses. Thus, psychology affirms identity's importance, even while showing it is less stable than we imagine. Another way of understanding identity is through narrative. Philosopher Paul Ricoeur argued that identity is not a fixed substance, but a story we tell about ourselves. This story links past, present, and future, giving us continuity and meaning. Our memories are edited into a narrative that explains who we are, even though many details are forgotten or reimagined. Hannah Arendt echoed this, suggesting that action and story reveal identity more than any abstract definition. Literature demonstrates this beautifully. Novels such as James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man or Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings trace identity through self-narration. Stories connect us to communities too. Cultural myths, family histories, and national narratives shape who we become. But narrative identity is fragile. What happens when trauma interrupts the story? When a person cannot reconcile who they were with who they are? Therapy often involves rewriting the self-story, integrating broken chapters into a larger whole. In this view, identity is less about what we are and more about the ongoing act of storytelling. The I is not a substance but a narrator, always in process, always becoming. Identity is never purely individual, it is also social. We become who we are in relation to others. Sociologists argue that identity emerges from interaction. We are parents because we have children, leaders because others follow, friends because others connect. Social identity theory highlights how groups, ethnicity, gender, religion, nationality, shape how we see ourselves. These categories can provide pride, belonging, and resilience, but also tension, exclusion, and conflict. W.E.B. Du Bois described the double consciousness of African Americans, torn between self-perception and the gaze of a prejudiced society. Simone de Beauvoir showed how women's identities were historically constructed in relation to men. These insights remind us that identity is not simply chosen, it is also imposed by culture and history. Today, digital life complicates this further. Social media allows multiple curated identities, raising questions about authenticity. Yet society can also nurture identity through recognition, acceptance, and community. Hannah Arendt's idea that identity is revealed in action highlights the social dimension. We are not selves in isolation, but in relation to the world. Identity, then, is both inward and outward, shaped by society as much as by self-reflection. With all these layers, body, memory, personality, soul, story, and society, identity can become overwhelming. Sometimes, identity collapses into crisis. Erik Erikson coined the term identity crisis to describe the struggle of adolescents who cannot reconcile conflicting aspects of self. But crises of identity happen throughout life, after loss, trauma, migration, or radical change. War, exile, and oppression can shatter identity, forcing individuals to rebuild from fragments. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, described how identity could survive even in the concentration camp if grounded in purpose. Yet not all crises are tragic. Sometimes they are transformative. A midlife crisis may lead to deeper authenticity, a reevaluation of who we truly are. Spiritual traditions often speak of such crises as necessary for growth. The dark night of the soul in Christian mysticism, the dissolution of ego in Buddhism, the stripping away of illusions in Sufism. Crisis reveals identity's fragility, but also its resilience. When shattered, the self can reform, sometimes stronger and truer than before. Thus, identity is not fixed. It is dynamic, tested and reborn through the very crises that threaten to destroy it. Having journeyed through so many perspectives, we now arrive at integration. Identity is not simply body, nor memory, nor personality, nor even soul. It is all of these together in dynamic interplay. Like a prism, the self refracts into many colors, but remains one light. Philosophers such as William James emphasized the plural self, an individual composed of multiple streams of consciousness. Buddhism reminds us that the self is not a permanent thing, yet its impermanence allows for compassion and change. Christianity offers the idea of unity in God, where diverse identities find wholeness. Modern psychology shows us that coherence of self is less about perfection and more about adaptability. Can we weave together our changing roles, our shifting stories, and our evolving values into something livable? Identity is a tapestry, woven of memory threads, social fabric, spiritual strands, and emotional colors. To deny any part of it is to lose richness. To embrace all of it is to see the complexity of who we are. Integration does not mean the end of conflict, but the recognition that contradictions are part of identity. We are both stable and changing, both individual and communal, both narrative and mystery. To say, "I am," is to hold together these tensions in a living whole. How can these abstract reflections shape our daily lives? First, they remind us to practice self-reflection. Asking, "Who am I?" is not a one-time question, but a lifelong practice. Journaling, meditation, or dialogue with trusted others helps us trace the patterns of our identity. Second, they call us to honor our stories. Telling your story, through writing, art, or conversation, strengthens the continuity of identity. Third, they invite us to embrace change. Identity is not a prison, but a process. Who we are at 20 may differ greatly from who we are at 50, and that is not failure, but growth. Fourth, they teach us to hold humility. If my identity is shaped by society, story, and memory, then others' identities deserve respect, even when different. Fifth, they give courage in crisis. When identity feels lost, it may be preparing for renewal. Philosophers, mystics, and psychologists all remind us that crises can give birth to deeper authenticity. Finally, these reflections ground us. Identity is not simply found, but made, moment by moment, choice by choice, relationship by relationship. To live is to continually create who we are becoming. These resources have been carefully selected to guide you deeper into the question of identity. Each one opens a new dimension of reflection, helping you see identity from different perspectives. Paul Ricoeur's One Self as Another explores the concept of narrative identity, showing how the stories we tell about ourselves shape who we are. It's challenging, but incredibly rewarding for anyone who wants a philosophical foundation. Erik Erikson's Identity. Youth and Crisis gives us the psychological side of the story. This is where the very idea of the identity crisis came into popular awareness, and it remains a touchstone for understanding how identity develops through life stages. Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings demonstrates identity through lived experience. Race, gender, trauma, and resilience all converge in a powerful memoir. It shows us identity as something forged not only within, but also in struggle with society. William James's The Principles of Psychology offers a groundbreaking look at consciousness and the plural self, concepts that are still shaping psychology today. And Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning reveals identity in its most extreme test, life in a concentration camp, and how purpose and meaning can preserve one's deepest self even under unimaginable suffering. Turning to podcasts, the Philosophy Bites episode with Galen Strawson distills centuries of philosophical debate into a short but stimulating dialogue. It's a great entry point for anyone curious about personal identity without wanting to dive straight into dense texts. The Hidden Brain episode, The Story of Your Life, brings neuroscience and psychology into the conversation, showing how narrative and memory create a sense of self in everyday life. Finally, the websites are excellent for ongoing exploration. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy gives you rigor and scholarly depth, while the Greater Good Science Center provides research on identity and well-being that is practical and accessible. And Aeon offers beautifully written essays that bridge philosophy, psychology, and culture, perfect for reflective reading. Together, these resources remind us that identity is not a single field of study. It is a meeting point where philosophy, psychology, literature, and lived experience come together. They encourage you to keep asking, keep reflecting, and keep exploring the question, who am I really? We have asked, who am I really? And traveled through philosophy, psychology, literature, and spirituality. We discovered that identity can be rooted in body, in memory, in personality, in soul, or in story. We saw how society shapes us and how crises test us. We found that identity is not one thing but many, not fixed but fluid, not given but made. Yet even after all this, the question remains, who am I? Perhaps that is the point. The question is never fully resolved. Instead, it becomes a companion, guiding our reflections, our choices, and our relationships. The self is both mystery and practice, both given and chosen, both fragmented and whole. To seek identity is to seek meaning, connection, and purpose. To affirm identity is to say, I exist, I matter, I am becoming. In the end, identity is not an answer. It is a journey. And now the question turns back to you. Who are you, really?